Hi, everybody. It's Miss Lester here. I'm coming to you with the first of several videos that is going to walk you through the writing workshop process of doing your written assignment. So, your first step for today, we're going to be talking about hooks and reflective statements. So, your first step is to go ahead and open up the slides and join me on the slide that starts with June 13th. I'm sorry, June 3rd. 2019, and we're going to walk through the different parts of what makes a good hook and what makes a good reflective statement. So if you're in the slides, let me go ahead and put this in presentation mode. So if you're in the slides, then what you're going to see here is the first thing is the rubric. So obviously over here, the reflective statement has its own criterion in the rubric, criterion A, which is fulfilling the requirements of the reflective statement. In order to get a 3, which is what we're all aiming for, it says the reflection on the interactive oral shows development of the student's understanding of cultural and contextual evidence. So you have to show that you are reflecting on these elements and how that reflection sort of helps you understand the complexity of the text. For your hook, the rubric criterion that is scored in is criterion D, which is organization and development. It's audience engagement. It's sort of getting their attention from the first part of the essay and kind of getting you into the main idea of your essay. So the first thing I'm going to show you here, I'm going to escape out of this and bring up the essay that I have been working with to sort of go through this process with you. And as you can see, I've already done this. The essay that I was revising didn't have a hook. It also didn't have background information, but we're going to save that for another time. So what I did is I just put in here, need a good hook, and then I highlighted it in light pink. So you should do the same for yours. Same way for your reflective statement. This one doesn't have one connected to it, but if it did, I would highlight it and I would make that light yellow just to show myself that I'm working through the steps of the process, so that way I know what all I've done and what also needs to still be done. Okay, the next slide, there is a checklist for both your hook and your reflective statement. Remember, I taught you guys how to do hooks when we went over The Stranger. We looked at some YouTube videos and I showed you 5 different ways to write a hook. But you know that my favorite way is to use a quote. So I'm going to show you exactly the process of how I would do that in just a moment. But first, let's talk reflective statements. So again, here's the checklist. Do you clearly explain what you learned? Do you connect the cultural element to the text of the novel? Do you clearly explain how the IO impacted your understanding? Have you included a specific word count? Is the title listed? And is it 2 to 3 paragraphs? On the next slide, I just went ahead and brought over the slide that I have been using with you guys in reflective statements all year long, what goes in each body paragraph, and what should be the parts of your reflective statement. Now, we're going to take a look at a couple of different reflective statements, one on Kafka on the Shore, and one on the Bolshevik Revolution and the Russian novel We. So if you take a look at the slides, what I did is I annotated them and explained why the one on We is a little bit stronger and why the one on Kafka on the Shore is a little bit weaker. Just some general things to avoid in your reflective statement. You don't want to generalize too much. You want to be really specific in your details and what you got out of the IO, what you learned from the IO, not speak in generalizations. Like, for example, usually Japanese parents have a weak relationship with their children. that's generalizing to the point of being mildly offensive. You want to make sure that you support the arguments and the ideas that you are putting in here with specific details from the IO. So use those notes that you took and that you turned in as a formative assessment to create this reflective statement, and make sure that you mention specific things rather than generalizing. What makes this second reflective statement so much stronger? The ideas are clear and specific. They contain specific details from the IO, and they basically lend to a nuanced, complex understanding of both the concept that they're talking about, which is communism, and the Bolshevik Revolution. And then they connect it to the novel in really specific ways. So that's why the second reflective statement is so much stronger than the first one. Now, to get into what makes a good hook, I've included a couple of different hooks in the slides, which you can read for yourself and look to see why they are good or quality hooks and what needs to be worked on. So neither one of these hooks are particularly strong because I think that they're pretty vague in general. The second one is attempting to use a broad idea to connect to the main idea, but it doesn't really integrate those ideas very strongly. The first one is just kind of vague and boring. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you how to write a hook that is not boring and that gets you into the main part of your essay. So here again, this is my essay. I've already revised this thesis statement, which you're going to see in the next video. But I wanted to sort of have a strong thesis before I tried to have a hook. You guys know that I work backwards in that way. I like to have the thesis done before I have the hook. So here's the thesis that I'm working with. Of course, this is an essay on A Doll's House. So here is my really amazing thesis statement. It says, in A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen, Nora, the central character, transforms from a subservient housewife to a questioning, independent woman due to the catalyzing effects of the other characters' actions, as well as contrast and symbolism. Ibsen wished to see a change in Norway's attitudes toward women. Therefore, let me mute that. Therefore, Nora's change as a character parallels the feminist change that Ibsen wanted to effect in his country as a whole. Sorry, that was so disjointed. My bad. Let me read that second sentence again. Ibsen wished to see a change in Norway's attitudes towards women. Therefore, Nora's change as a character parallels the feminist change Ibsen wanted to effect in his country as a whole. So the key words here are catalyzing, change, and I would say parallel, right? So what I'm going to do, I am going to write a great hook. I think the easiest thing I could find would probably be quotes about change. So quotes about change. Let's see. Okay, so, there's a lot of them. It looks like there's some Goodreads quotes, some Brainy quote stuff. I'm going to check out Goodreads because I really like the quotes that they come up with a lot of the times. Okay, so let's see here. So we have a longish one here from a guy I don't know. I want to try to pick somebody that people may have heard of. And that shouldn't be hard to do with so many quotes about change. This Margaret Mead one is pretty good. Let's see, changing the world. I like that Leo Tolstoy one, but it doesn't really have to do with, well, actually, I could use that and just sort of write around it and then connect it to the Ibsen quote or to the Ibsen play. Let's see. I'm just going to kind of scroll through to see. Okay, I think I am going to use that Leo Tolstoy quote. So I'm just going to kind of copy and paste it. And then I'll set about the work of integrating it. So I'm going to paste it here where it says need a good hook because that's what I'm working on. So everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Okay, so first off, I need to attribute this to Leo Tolstoy. Now, for those of you who don't know, Leo Tolstoy is a Russian novelist. He wrote War and Peace and a few other things. But if I didn't know who he was, I would just run a Google search. I would add just Leo Tolstoy, and boom, there he is with his beard and looking very serious. So Leo Tolstoy, again, Russian writer, famous as a novelist. So let me include that in my hook. So according to, I don't like according to, Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy once wrote, and there's my quote: "Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself." Okay, so the change here, it's about activism. Remember, we know that Ibsen is an activist, so we kind of want to bring this all sort of like full circle to connect the hook to the body of the essay. So we see this desire for change mirrored in the 19th century playwright Henrik Ibsen, specifically with regard to the issue of feminism, period. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just highlight that in light pink because I might want to come back to this later and make some changes. I want to make sure that I have like done all of the steps and that I've completely color coded everything. The other thing I'm going to do is just add some really quick background information. So I'm going to use what I got from the IO on first wave feminism. Ibsen was writing in Norway in the 1870s, around the time of first wave feminism in the United States. Ibsen was inspired by the work of women like Susan B. Anthony and the suffragettes, and he mounted a campaign. I don't really like how that sounds. He had this inspiration in mind when he wrote his most famous and influential realist play, A Doll's House. Let me make sure that I italicize that while I'm thinking about it. So there we go. Now my intro paragraph is starting to look like something. So I've got a really great hook here. I've got a really good thesis statement down here. I've got my background information here. So I'm really starting to get to a point where I like what this is turning into. So remember, revise, workshop this, have it looking in like it's in a good state. So then when I see you next week, we don't have a lot of changes to make. I should see very colorful, color-coded hooks and thesis statements, and then in a couple of days, in not the next video, but the following one, we're going to work on topic sentences. So one thing at a time, we're going to build this written assignment to be a great cornerstone of your diploma program. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.